Hey folks, I'm Judson from Kootenay Backcountry Guides with a snowpack update for the Whitewater Backcountry on January 29th. So right now we're on a north aspect at 1910 meters in the Evening Ridge area. And what I have to report here is somewhat of bad news. I hate to be that guy, but what I'm seeing here I don't like quite a bit. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna talk you through these layers and what's going on in the snowpack. And then afterwards I'm gonna do a test and test these layers. So what we have going on here is all of this amazing POW in the top 40 centimeters or so. So this last storm here, everyone's been shredding inbounds down about 40 centimeters is this last snowfall that started on January 26th. And it's warmed up a little bit, so this snow on the surface here is starting to slab up. And the unfortunate part of this whole thing is that there is a significant layer of surface hoar. So anybody who was out touring last week saw these giant surface hoar crystals, and they were everywhere. And it was super sad because we didn't have much snow, and there's this huge surface hoar layer. So now we have a prominent surface hoar down 40 centimeters. Now, to add to our misery here, there is a crust layer down about 45, so about 5 centimeters below it. And right above that crust layer is another layer of surface hoar. So this layer of surface hoar is somewhat spotty. So it's not everywhere, and it doesn't show itself all the time. But what you do see is this other surface hoar layer, which is the January 26th layer. It is prominent, huge flakes. So down below, we're at tree line, and down below us we actually found a crown of an avalanche, and I dug down to check and see what it failed on, and we found surface hoar, and that surface hoar was 12 to 18 millimeters big and perfectly preserved. Okay, and because these layers, these two surface hoar layers, are sitting here with this slab over it, and they are now sitting on a crust, that kind of makes it even worse. So what we have below is what I'm calling the mid-January crust complex. So without getting too deep into things, we had that unfortunate incident that happened mid-January around the 11th to the 13th where it rained, it snowed, and then it rained again, and it's created these two prominent crusts in the snowpack. We can see them, and when you dig down or you even try to saw through them, they're actually challenging to saw through. So the good news is that this lower crust here is so thick and so hard. It's really rock hard ice. It's unlikely in my books, in my estimation, that we're going to see much avalanche activity below this crust because it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's everywhere I've been in the last 2 weeks. I've found this crust in the Nelson and Kootenay Pass backcountry. And then below that, down about 80, is that January 11th surface hoar. So this January 11th surface hoar, we can see it right here. It's an obvious stripe in the snowpack, and it was responsible for a decent avalanche cycle that went on during this mid-January storm that came up to here. But the one thing with it is that it actually got rained on. So it's been kind of interesting. In a lot of places, the surface hoar here, this January 11th, is tricky to find. And it's showing these, you can actually see them, these old surface hoar that is actually like a crust. And so it's melted out old surface hoar with rain. And I still don't 100% trust it. But the good thing about it is that at least there is this crust over top, which is hopefully bridging and preventing avalanches occurring on here. But all of this kind of doesn't matter that much because this upper surface hoar layer is so prominent that, and it's deep enough now that it can cause an avalanche that will be big enough to kill you. So Avalanche Canada is calling the hazard considerable, 3 times considerable locally. And from my observations on the tour up here today, I would say that's consistent. We were seeing avalanches in the forest. So there was numerous crowns from size 1s and 1.5s going on in the forest on this surface hoar layer. This surface hoar layer is so prominent, it's even in the trees. There is nowhere that I didn't find it. The only place that I wasn't really seeing this January 26th surface hoar layer was in the Alpine where it had been windy. But again, this crust though, these two crusts, they extend all the way up to mountaintop. We were finding these crusts all the way up on top of Half Dome. So who knows if the snow in the Alpine is bonded to this crust, and judging by the avalanche activity in Weimer Bowl in the last little while here, there have been avalanches, that it is consistent that this layer in general is not to be trusted. We're going to be reading about this January 26th surface hoar and the other surface hoar layer sitting over top of the crust. It's either January 16th or whatever, it doesn't matter. They're 5 centimeters apart, and either an avalanche on either layer is going to be big enough to kill you. We're going to be reading about this in the bulletin for a long time. The surface hoar is perfectly preserved, and as it warms up and we get more and more load, this slab that's sitting on top of this surface hoar is only going to build. It's going to get tricky, and we're going to have a lot of patience dealing with this layer of surface hoar over the next while here. All right, so I'm going to do some testing on this layer, this January 26th and the January 16th over the crust, these two layers with an extended column test. My suspicion is we may not get a fracture across here, just based on the fact that this snow is actually pretty low density sitting on top of it. But that being said, it is a surface hoar crystal, so I don't trust it at all. So even with any test, even if I do a test and I don't get a result on surface hoar, I still don't trust it because I never trust surface hoar, okay? So what we're looking for at this test is cracks going across the entire column. So I'm going to take my shovel and start with 10 taps from my wrist on the side. So nothing on my easy taps. And now I'm going to move from my elbow. So there's our first little crack, but really nothing significant, and it's not on the surface hoar. So there it is. So we got a failure there on the surface hoar on the Jan 26th on about 8 taps there of my moderate hit. And it cracked, but it did not cross across the whole column, which is kind of what I suspected, because this snow is still pretty low density, so there's not enough tension in this upper pack for it to slide across the whole column. But if we get more wind or it warms up, what's going to happen is this is going to turn into a slab over top of this layer. So I'm still curious about what's going on top of the crust. So I'm going to continue on with my tests and finish them off. And now what I want to do is work off of my shoulder and do some heavy taps. So there we got another failure on the surface hoar layer that is just above the crust right now. It did not crack across the whole column, which is good, but again, we still have pretty low density snow sitting on top of it, so I'm not trusting this. But what I can see with my naked eyes is I can see the surface hoar. So I can see 2 prominent layers of surface hoar sitting on top of this crust. I don't like it. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about a test that I love called the Burp Test. And the Burp Test is great for doing storm shears, because what often happens when you're doing a compression test or extended column test and you have low density storm snow is your shovel comes down and just compresses all the snow on the top. So what the Burp Test does is it tests from the bottom where you're in the solid snow, and then you get to see the results on the layers of concern in the storm snow. So what I do is I take, it's about 30 by 30. This one isn't perfect, it's about 25, but you aim for 30 by 30, and it only really works in the top 45 or 50. If you go any deeper than that, it's too heavy to carry. So what you do is you burp it like a baby. So what I do is I've got it, and you can actually see the angle, right? So I want to get the block angled a little bit, and it's already angled this way. So I'm kind of aiming to try and get it, I don't know, 35 to 40-ish degrees angle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap from the bottom and just start with my wrist and see if I can get any. There we go. So it just completely failed in the surface hoar layer across the whole top. I'm actually curious about a layer in the crust as well. So I'm going to take it and see. Oh, there, it just fell right off. So that's that surface hoar layer, the January 26th, large surface hoar crystals failing, and yeah, don't trust that layer. I can keep tapping and see if I get another result on this crust here. I'm not getting anything per se, so anyway, burp test. It doesn't take a lot of time. This is kind of cool about the burp test. You don't have to dig a full pit. You can actually do it on a hand shear block. Just take your shovel out and test. It's one of the best tests for storm snow out there. Okay, so just to summarize our snowpack here, we have 40 centimeters of recent storm snow sitting on top of two prominent surface hoar layers sitting on top of a crust. So that is why the hazard rating is 3 times considerable and will likely remain that way for the foreseeable future. Anytime we're getting new snow, we're getting wind, it's time to pull back, because then we might have naturals happening, and it's really time to dial back your terrain choices right now. Stay out of wind-loaded areas, stay out of steep slopes as well. So yeah, if you like this information, we do have courses coming up with spots on them. We have plenty of room on mat courses. We have some spots left on AST2 courses, and the guiding team here at Kootenay Backcountry Guides is going to be out in the field for the rest of the winter, continuing to gather information and share it with everyone within the community, with our mission to keep everybody safer.